My name is Anya Sterling, and I'm 28 years old. For most of my life, I have felt like a whisper in a city that prefers to shout. I was born and raised in Charleston, South Carolina, a place where history isn't just in the past, it's a living, breathing entity that dictates the present. It clings to the air with the scent of salt water and jasmine, settles in the cracks of the cobblestone streets, and resides in the proud, unyielding set of my mother's shoulders. For the past 6 years, I've worked as a lead UX designer for Lumina Innovations, a small but fiercely creative software firm tucked away in a renovated warehouse on the less fashionable side of town. I spend my days trying to understand the intricate pathways of human thought, translating empathy into elegant, intuitive digital experiences. It's a job I love, a craft that feels like a quiet conversation between technology and humanity. To my family, however, it has always been an inscrutable and slightly embarrassing profession. My mother, Eleanor, could never quite grasp it. "You do something with computers?" she'd ask, her tone suggesting it was on par with being a telephone psychic. The irony, a constant companion in my life, is that my little computer job has afforded me a life of quiet stability they could no longer claim. With a salary of $120,000 a year, plus bonuses tied to project successes, I had not only built a comfortable life, but also a significant portfolio of investments and savings. I lived in a bright, airy condo overlooking the Ashley River, a space I owned outright. My mother, meanwhile, still resided in the magnificent, money pit of a Charleston single house south of Broad Street where I grew up. It was our family's primary asset, not just financially, but socially. It was the stage upon which she performed her life, hosting garden parties and historical society luncheons, all in service of maintaining the fragile illusion of the Sterling family's enduring prominence. She didn't know, and I never had the heart or the courage to tell her, that her quiet, disappointing daughter had become the most financially secure person in our family. I was walking along the Battery, the evening air thick and sweet with the smell of the marsh, when the call came. The sky was bruised with the colors of a fading sunset, and the palmetto trees stood like dark sentinels against the horizon. The conversation was the culmination of a storm that had been brewing for days, ever since my sister Olivia's engagement party. "I hope you're satisfied, Anya." My mother's voice was as cold and smooth as river stone. "After all the trouble you've caused, the family has made a decision. It's best if you keep your distance for the foreseeable future. Permanently." The line went dead. I stood there, the gentle lapping of the water against the seawall the only sound. A few feet away, a couple laughed, their silhouettes dark against the glowing harbor. For a moment, the world felt like a photograph I wasn't in. The source of my exile? My refusal to lie. At Olivia's party, I had declined to diminish my life's work to make my sister, and by extension my mother, appear more impressive to her fiancé's old money family. I had simply told the truth. And in my family, the truth was often an unforgivable offense. I walked back toward my condo, my mind a slow-motion replay of the phone call. A familiar ache settled behind my ribs, the dull pain of a wound that never quite heals. This time, however, it felt different. There was a chilling finality in her tone and amputation. As I fumbled for my keys, my hands were trembling, not from the evening breeze, but from a deep, unsettling premonition that this was not an ending, but the beginning of an unraveling. Just as the thought crossed my mind, my phone vibrated with a text from an unknown number. It was brief and formal. "Urgent matter regarding your family's financial portfolio. Please contact Walter Sterling at Lowcountry Financial Advisors at your earliest convenience." I stared at the screen, a cold knot tightening in my stomach. Walter Sterling. The name was vaguely familiar, a friend of my late father's. But why would a financial advisor be contacting me about family matters, especially now? At the very moment I had been formally cast out, a string I didn't know existed was pulling me back in. Something was deeply wrong, and I had a terrible feeling the worst was yet to come. Growing up in the Sterling household was an education in the art of presentation. My mother, Eleanor, was the curator of our family's image, a tireless guardian of appearances. Our home, with its deep, shaded piazzas and perfectly manicured garden, was her museum. Every piece of antique furniture, every polished silver tray, every carefully arranged bouquet of magnolias was a testament to a legacy she was terrified of losing. My sister, Olivia, 3 years my senior, was her masterpiece. She was beautiful, charming, and effortlessly navigated the complex social currents of Charleston society. She'd majored in art history, married a man from a respectable family right out of college, and settled into a life defined by volunteer committees and brunch dates. Olivia understood the unspoken rules. She knew how to be just successful enough not to be boring, but never so much as to be intimidating. She was a reflection of our mother's values, and for that, she was cherished. I, on the other hand, was the poorly framed, abstract painting stuck in the attic. After graduating with a degree in graphic design, I didn't rush to find a husband. I was more interested in building something of my own. I took an internship at Lumina Innovations and fell in love with the logic and creativity of user experience design. I worked my way up, project by project, finding a deep satisfaction in solving complex problems and creating things that helped people. To my mother, this was a baffling and regrettable path. A trade school, essentially. She once described my degree to a friend from the Spoleto Festival board, her voice dripping with pity. She couldn't comprehend that my work involved strategy, psychology, and a high degree of technical skill. In her world, value was tied to heritage, not innovation. "Why can't you find a position at the museum or a gallery?" she would sigh during our strained family dinners. "Something with a bit of culture, Anya." I tried to explain that I did, in fact, work with culture, the digital culture that was shaping the modern world. I tried to describe the satisfaction of designing an interface for a healthcare app that made it easier for elderly patients to manage their prescriptions, or a learning platform that helped children in underserved communities. But Eleanor's mind was a walled garden, and my words were just weeds she'd refused to let take root. In her narrative, I was the daughter who had aimed low and settled for less. The gap between my reality and their perception of it had widened into a chasm. While they pictured me hunched over a keyboard in a cubicle, subsisting on ramen noodles, I was quietly, diligently building a future. I had a diversified investment portfolio, a healthy retirement account, and no debt to my name. I'd kept it all to myself, not out of secrecy, but for the sake of peace. Revealing my success would have felt like an act of aggression, a disruption of the delicate, dysfunctional ecosystem of our family. Eleanor needed a narrative of her own superiority, and I, in my quiet way, had become the benchmark against which she measured her own and Olivia's success. The engagement party 3 days earlier had brought it all to a head. It was held in the garden of our family home, under a canopy of ancient live oaks draped in Spanish moss. Fairy lights twinkled, and the air was thick with the scent of gardenias and the polite murmur of Charleston's elite. Olivia was radiant, and her fiancé, Harrison, was the epitome of a Southern gentleman. His parents, the formidable Mr. and Mrs. Caldwell, were the guests of honor. Their family had been in Charleston since before the Revolution, and their approval was, to my mother, the ultimate prize. At one point, Mrs. Caldwell, a woman with diamonds in her ears and ice in her veins, turned to me. "And what is it that you do, dear?" she'd asked, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. I answered honestly. I spoke about my work at Lumina, about a recent project we'd launched for a major nonprofit, and the joy I found in creating elegant solutions to messy human problems. With every word, I felt my mother's smile tighten. Later, she cornered me by the fountain, her fingers digging into my arm. "Must you be so verbose about your little job?" she hissed, her voice a venomous whisper. "It makes Olivia look like she isn't the ambitious one. It's unseemly. From now on, when people ask, you just say you do some graphic design and leave it at that. Be smaller, Anya. For your sister." I had looked at her, at the desperation in her eyes, and for the first time in my life, a quiet but firm no rose from a place deep within me. "No, Mother. I won't make myself smaller to make you more comfortable." That refusal, that simple act of self-respect, had been my declaration of war. 2 days after my banishment, I found myself driving down Trad Street, a force of habit pulling me toward my childhood home. What I saw sent a fresh wave of grief through me. A locksmith's van was parked out front. As I watched, a man in a blue work shirt finished installing a new, gleaming brass deadbolt on the heavy cypress door. He packed up his tools and drove away, leaving the new lock to glint in the afternoon sun. My mother had literally, physically, locked me out. I sat in my car across the street, staring at the house. It was more than a building. It was the repository of my entire childhood. I could picture myself reading on the second-floor piazza, the salty breeze rustling the pages of my book. I could smell the lemon polish my mother used on the antique sideboard in the dining room. From the outside, everything looked the same. The climbing roses were still in bloom, their pink petals a soft contrast against the dark green shutters. But I was no longer part of the picture. Mrs. Henderson, our neighbor for 30 years, came out to collect her mail. She saw me, her hand raising in a hesitant wave before she seemed to think better of it, scurrying back inside with a worried glance over her shoulder. The humiliation burned in my cheeks. My mother's campaign of erasure was already underway. I drove home, the city lights blurring through my unshed tears. That night, I tried calling Olivia. I thought, naively, that she might be a bridge, a voice of reason. The call went to voicemail. "Olivia, it's me," I said, my voice unsteady. "I know things are tense, but I really need to talk to you. Mom has, well, you know. I don't understand why it's gone this far. Please, just call me." The call was never returned. The silence was her answer. She had chosen her side. Work became my sanctuary. The clean logic of code and design principles was a balm to my chaotic emotional state. My colleagues at Lumina were a different kind of family, one built on mutual respect and shared passion. My boss, David, called me into his office, his expression kind. "Anya, I just got off the phone with the team from the Museum Foundation," he said, a smile crinkling the corners of his eyes. "They're ecstatic with the new donor portal you designed. They said it's the most significant leap forward in their outreach in a decade. They specifically requested you lead the next phase of the project." The project was a multi-year, multi-million-dollar contract. It was the biggest professional validation of my career. Under normal circumstances, I would have been floating. Instead, I felt the sharp, bitter pang of what I had lost. "Thank you, David. That's great news. You okay?" he asked, his brow furrowed with genuine concern. "You seem a world away." "Just some family stuff," I said, the understatement of the century. "Nothing that will affect my work." As I walked back to my desk, the cruel dichotomy of my life struck me with full force. My professional world was expanding, blooming with opportunity and respect. My personal world, the one that was supposed to be my foundation, had shrunk to the size of my condo. I had everything I had ever worked for, yet I felt utterly and completely alone. That evening, my phone rang. It was the call that would detonate the carefully constructed facade of my family and change the course of all our lives. The call came on a Thursday evening, just as a low-country thunderstorm was beginning to roll in. I was curled on my sofa, watching the lightning flash over the river, a half-eaten bowl of shrimp and grits cooling on the coffee table. The number was local, but unfamiliar. I let it ring 3 times before a strange instinct made me answer. "Miss Sterling?" "Anya Sterling," a man's voice asked. It was graveled with age and concern. "This is Walter Sterling of Lowcountry Financial. I apologize for the late hour, but I must speak with you about a matter of some urgency regarding your family's estate." I sat up straight, my appetite vanishing. "I'm sorry, Mr. Sterling, but I think you have the wrong person. I'm not really involved in my family's finances anymore." "On the contrary, Miss Sterling," he said, and I could hear the rustle of papers. "According to the legal documents I have on file, drawn up by your late father, you are listed as the primary beneficiary and, more importantly, the emergency financial proxy for both your mother's and your sister's accounts. I've been trying to reach your mother for over a month with no success. The situation has become critical." My mind struggled to catch up. "That's impossible. My mother and we had a falling out. She wouldn't want me anywhere near her affairs." "Be that as it may, the paperwork is legally binding." "It was your father's directive," Walter explained, his voice strained. Miss Sterling, I truly need to see you in person. There are severe irregularities we must discuss, and I cannot, in good conscience, detail them over the phone. Are you available to meet tomorrow morning? I agreed, a sense of dreamlike dread settling over me. After we hung up, I paced the length of my living room, the thunder outside a fitting soundtrack to the storm in my head. My father. He had passed away 10 years ago, but his foresight was reaching across time to pull me into this mess. He, unlike my mother, had seen the pragmatist in me, the quiet strength she had always mistaken for weakness. Why would she leave this designation in place while so determinately pushing me away? It was a contradiction that made no sense. The next morning was gray and humid, the air heavy with the aftermath of the storm. Lowcountry Financial Advisors was housed in a handsome brick building on Broad Street, its interiors a soothing world of dark wood, leather-bound books, and quiet confidence. Walter Sterling was a man in his late 60s, with kind eyes, a neatly trimmed silver beard, and the weary posture of someone who frequently delivered bad news. "Thank you for coming on such short notice, Anya," he said, forgoing the formal Miss Sterling and gesturing to a plush armchair. "I knew your father well. A good man. A smart man. I'm afraid what I have to tell you will be difficult to hear." He opened a thick, leather-bound folder and began to lay documents across the polished surface of his desk. They were a cascade of account statements, loan agreements, and official-looking letters. "Over the past 18 months," he began, his voice low, "your mother and sister have made a series of catastrophic financial decisions. They've liquidated the entirety of their investment and retirement portfolios, taken out 3 separate mortgages against the family home, and funneled all of it into a fraudulent investment scheme." My breath caught in my throat. "How much?" "In total, their losses are approximately $750,000, Walter said, his gaze full of pity. "The house on Trad Street, which was owned free and clear, is now leveraged to its absolute maximum value. They owe a staggering amount to multiple creditors." I stared at the numbers, but they wouldn't compute. $750,000. The house, our anchor, our history, was gone. "There's more," he continued, his expression grim. "The entity they invested with, a company called the Palmetto Heritage Trust, was a complete fabrication. The SEC shut them down 6 weeks ago. The principals were arrested for orchestrating a sophisticated Ponzi scheme. Your mother and sister are among dozens of victims in the Charleston area. Because they borrowed so heavily against the house, their situation is one of the most severe I've seen." "Why are you telling me this?" I whispered, though I already knew the answer. "Because as the designated financial proxy, you're the only one with the legal authority to intervene now that they have become non-responsive." "Anya," he paused, looking me directly in the eye. "Based on their current cash flow and debt obligations, the bank will begin foreclosure proceedings in less than 30 days. They are going to lose everything unless someone steps in." Now, the irony was so profound it was almost comical. I had been cast out as a family disgrace, but I was, it turned out, their only lifeline. I left Walter's office in a daze, clutching a portfolio filled with the anatomy of my family's ruin. The drive back to my condo was a blur. By the time I walked through my front door, the initial shock had begun to curdle into a potent mixture of fury and disbelief. The Palmetto Heritage Trust. The name itself was a masterstroke of predatory marketing, designed to appeal directly to my mother's obsession with legacy and tradition. They had promised impossible returns, 20% annually, on investments in exclusive historical renovation projects. It was a story Eleanor wanted to believe, a narrative of effortlessly multiplying old money. I spread the documents across my dining room table, the clean, minimalist surface now cluttered with the evidence of their folly. As a UX designer, I could almost admire the cruel elegance of the scam. I found their website, still cached online. It was beautifully designed, with sepia-toned photos of Charleston landmarks, glowing testimonials from fictitious, founding families, and complex-looking charts that meant absolutely nothing. It was a user experience designed to bypass logic and appeal directly to greed and fear. The numbers were horrifying. The house, valued at around $1.5 million, now carried mortgages totaling its full market value. My mother's inheritance from my father, an investment portfolio that should have been worth over $500,000, was gone. Even Olivia's modest 401k from her brief stint working before her first child was born had been cashed out, the penalties paid, and the money fed into the scheme. Their monthly obligations were impossible. Between the mortgage payments, property taxes, insurance, and the minimums on a half-dozen maxed-out credit cards, they needed nearly $9,000 a month. Walter's notes indicated my mother's only income was a small widow's pension and Social Security, totaling less than $3,000. I called Walter back that afternoon. How could this happen for so long without you noticing? I tried to warn them, Anya, he said, his voice heavy with frustration. When your mother first requested to liquidate her portfolio, I advised against it in the strongest possible terms. She informed me, quite icily, that she was moving her assets to an advisor who better understood modern opportunities. She and Olivia stopped taking my calls a year ago. She effectively fired me, but she never legally removed you as the proxy. Your father's instructions were very specific. That night, sleep was impossible. I looked up Eleanor on social media. There she was, just last week, smiling at a charity gala, tagged in a photo with the mayor's wife. She was still performing, polishing the brass on the Titanic as it sank. The next morning, I drove to Trad Street. I didn't bother with the doorbell. I used the old iron key to the garden gate, a key my mother had forgotten about, and let myself into the back garden. The air of neglect was palpable. The prize-winning roses were wilting, the flagstone path choked with weeds. I walked up the back steps and onto the piazza. Through the French doors, I saw my sister sitting at the kitchen table, her head in her hands. I tapped gently on the glass. She looked up, her face a mask of shock and exhaustion. She opened the door. Anya, you can't be here, Mother said. I know what Mother said, I interrupted, my voice quiet but firm. But we need to talk about Walter Sterling and the Palmetto Heritage Trust. The color drained from Olivia's face. How do you know about that? Because I'm the emergency financial proxy, I said, stepping past her into the house. A detail you both conveniently forgot to mention when you were exiling me. The house felt different. Colder. I noticed gaps where cherished heirlooms used to be. The tall case clock from our grandfather was gone. So was the set of antique silver tea service from the dining room sideboard. They had been selling off our history, piece by piece, to stay afloat. Where's Mom? She's in her room. She hasn't been feeling well, Olivia said weakly. Anya, we didn't know what to do. The man from the trust, he was so persuasive. He said we were securing the family's future, that Mom would never have to worry again. By mortgaging this house to the hilt? By draining every last cent of her retirement. My voice was rising, and I fought to keep it level. Olivia started to cry, silent, racking sobs. I wanted to help pay for the wedding without asking Harrison's family for anything. I wanted to feel independent. It all seemed so perfect. The perfect solution had become the perfect catastrophe. Eleanor emerged from her bedroom 20 minutes later. She looked frail, her usual impeccable posture stooped with the weight of her secrets. When she saw me, her expression was a battlefield of shock, anger, and a flicker of what looked like desperate relief. I told you not to come here, she said, but the words had no fire. Walter Sterling told me everything, I replied calmly. $750,000, Mom. The house. Dad's legacy. All of it. Gone. She sank into an armchair, her hands trembling in her lap. How was I to know? They had an office on Meeting Street. They knew the Thorntons, the Ravenels. Everyone was talking about them. They were con artists, Mom. It was a Ponzi scheme, I said, pulling up a news article on my phone about the arrests. I showed it to her. They targeted people exactly like you. People more concerned with who someone knows than with what they're actually selling. Olivia stared at the phone. But he showed us architectural plans, financial projections. All fake, I said flatly. There were no renovation projects. There was no trust. There was only your money, flowing into their pockets. We sat in silence, the truth hanging in the air like the oppressive summer humidity. The grand house, once a symbol of our status, now felt like a tomb. We're going to lose the house, aren't we? Eleanor whispered. Without a massive intervention, yes. You owe more than it's worth, and you have no income to service the debt. What about bankruptcy? Olivia asked, her voice thin. It's an option, I conceded. But you'd still lose the house, your credit would be destroyed for a decade, and it wouldn't erase the shame. And I know, for you both, that's the real currency. They both looked at me then, their eyes filled with a terrifying, desperate hope. They were finally seeing me, not as the disappointing daughter, but as a potential solution. There is another way, I said slowly, letting the words land. But it would mean accepting a few things you've spent my entire life refusing to see. Eleanor's pride flared, a last dying ember. What do you mean? I said, meeting her gaze, that your daughter, the one with the silly computer job, is very, very successful. I make more than enough to fix this. I own my home. I have no debt. I have the resources to stop the foreclosure and clean up this catastrophic mess. Olivia stared at me, her mouth agape. How? By working hard at a career you both dismissed as being beneath me, I said. But before I do anything, I need to know why. Why, after all this, was I still the person on that form? Eleanor looked away, her gaze fixed on a water stain on the ceiling. It was your father, she said, her voice barely audible. When we last updated our wills, he insisted. He said you were the only one with a level head on your shoulders. He said you were the rock. That if the worst ever happened, you'd be the one to know what to do. Dad was right, I said softly. The question is, after everything that's happened, do I still want to? I let the question hang in the air. The power in the room had shifted, completely and irrevocably. I was no longer the one seeking approval. I was the one who would decide their fate. I pulled a leather-bound notebook and a pen from my bag, placing them on the dusty coffee table with a quiet thud that echoed in the silent room. First, I began, my voice calm and measured. We are going to have a brutally honest conversation about money. All of it. No more illusions. No more performing for the neighbors. The show is over. Eleanor flinched as if struck. Anya, you don't understand the expectations, the pressure. I understand perfectly, I cut her off, not with anger, but with an unshakable firmness. I understand you were so desperate to project an image of wealth that you gambled away your actual wealth. I understand that you were so busy looking down on my life that you never bothered to look at your own. We never meant for any of this to happen, Olivia whimpered. Intentions don't stop foreclosure proceedings, I said. Facts do. And the first fact we all need to accept is that I am not the family failure. I am the family's only remaining asset. I clicked my pen open and began to write. Here is my offer. I will use my own funds to pay off the most critical debts and halt the foreclosure. I will work with Walter to consolidate everything into a single, structured loan, which I will co-sign and for which I will make the payments. I will save this house. A wave of relief so profound it was almost visible washed over them. But I held up my hand. This is not a gift, I continued. It's a bailout. And bailouts come with terms. Strict terms. From this day forward, our family operates under new management. What kind of terms? Eleanor asked, her voice trembling. Term 1, absolute financial transparency. I get access to every account, every statement, every bill. All of your existing credit cards will be canceled. I will issue you each a new card with a very small, preset limit for essentials, and I will review every single charge at the end of the month. Term 2, no major financial decisions, and for you, that means anything over $200 will be made without my direct approval. You will not buy a new dress, you will not join a new club, you will not donate to a single charity auction without clearing it with me first. Term 3, I said, pausing to let the weight of it sink in. You will both get jobs. The silence that followed was deafening. Eleanor looked utterly horrified. A job? Anya, I'm 64 years old. What would I possibly do? Whatever you can. Retail, administrative work, hostess at a restaurant. I don't care. You will contribute to the household income. The days of living off a legacy you were actively destroying are over. The same goes for you, Olivia. Part-time, at least. You need to understand the value of a dollar that you have actually earned. But what will people think? Eleanor whispered, the question that had guided her entire life. They will think you are two responsible women doing what it takes to save your home, I replied. A far more noble story than the one you were heading towards. The weeks that followed were a surreal exercise in reverse mentorship. I, the daughter who had been lectured on propriety my whole life, became the ultimate authority. I set up spreadsheets, created budgets, and held weekly financial check-ins at the kitchen table where I had once been chastised for my life choices. The first budget review was a revelation. $350 at a hair salon, Mom? While the bank is threatening to foreclose. I asked, pointing to a credit card statement. A woman has to maintain standards, she argued weakly. Your new standard is a box of dye from the drugstore until further notice, I said. Olivia had spent over $200 on organic, artisanal baby food. Harrison's mother says it's the only brand worth giving a child. The baby will be perfectly happy with the kind from the grocery store, I countered. Harrison's mother isn't paying your mortgage. I was relentless, and I had to be. Their financial instincts were so warped by years of privilege and illusion that they couldn't distinguish between a want and a need. They chafed under my authority, but the terror of losing the house was a powerful motivator. The job search was the most difficult, and in a way, the most satisfying part of the rehabilitation. After dozens of rejections, Eleanor, who had once chaired the city's most prestigious arts gala, took a part-time position at a high-end bookstore on King Street. She was tasked with stocking shelves and working the cash register. Olivia, who had only ever managed a household, found a job as a morning receptionist at a pediatric dental clinic. Their re-entry into the workforce was a shock to their systems. Eleanor complained of sore feet and condescending customers. Olivia was exhausted by the rigid schedule and the constant demands of a ringing phone. I had no idea it was this hard, Olivia admitted during one of our meetings, looking genuinely defeated. To have to be somewhere every day to answer to a boss. I'm so tired by the end of the day. Welcome to the real world, I said, not unkindly. It's where I've been living all along. 6 months into the new regime, we hit a milestone. The house was secure. The consolidated debt was being paid down on a steady schedule. And more importantly, a flicker of understanding had begun to dawn in my mother and sister's eyes. During our year-end review, sitting at that same kitchen table, Eleanor looked at me, her own eyes clear of their usual defensive pride. Anya, she said, her voice quiet but steady. I need to apologize to you. I was wrong. About your work, about your choices, about you. I spent so many years judging you by a standard that was hollow, and all the while, you were building a life of actual substance. You saved us. Your father was right about you. You are the rock. The apology was a balm on a wound I hadn't realized was still so raw. It didn't erase the years of hurt, but it opened a door for something new to grow. I appreciate that, Mom, I said. But this was never about being right. It was about becoming honest. With ourselves and with each other. Olivia nodded, tears welling in her eyes. I was so wrapped up in what I was supposed to be, I never saw how amazing you actually were. I'm so sorry, Anya. As the first anniversary of the crisis passed, I looked at the three of us and saw a completely new landscape. The old hierarchy was gone, replaced by a tentative, fragile partnership. The daughter who had been locked out of her home now held the master key to its survival. The consequences were real and lasting. Eleanor's social standing took a significant hit when word got out about her job. Some of her fair-weather friends drifted away. Olivia's wedding was a much smaller, more intimate affair than the grand ball she had dreamed of, a fact that caused some friction with the Caldwell family. They had to learn to live within the boundaries of their reality, not their aspirations. Looking back, the victory felt different than I would have imagined. There was a quiet satisfaction, yes, but it was layered with a deep, abiding sadness for all the years we had lost to illusion. I had gained control and a measure of justice, but what I valued more was the hard-won respect that now sat between us. We were not the same family, and we never would be again. The glossy, perfect photograph had been torn up. But in its place, we were slowly, carefully, piecing together a mosaic, less perfect, perhaps, but infinitely more real, and held together by the strong, resilient grout of truth. And I had learned that sometimes, the greatest act of love is not to be smaller, but to be strong enough to teach others how to stand on their own.